Hoon is a North Korean fugitive who is secretly a genius doctor who can cure anything with surgery. However, his life has been in danger for the last 20 years, and it all started in 1994 when the threat of war between North Korea and South Korea depended on a single surgeon, his dad Cheol. He was visited by a member of parliament called Suk-ju, who asked him to operate on a special patient while Hoon went to school. When Hoon returned home, he greeted Agent Sunglasses and handed him a candy that the man would never forget. Then Suk-ju took his leave, hoping Cheol would consider his offer. It was later revealed that the patient who needed heart surgery was the supreme leader of North Korea. If he died, the US would definitely kickstart the war. Later, Hoon overheard his father asking Hoon's mother to take care of their son, but she said she didn't want anything to do with him. The next day, Hoon begged his dad not to leave him behind, but he insisted that he had to go with his mother. Park Cheol coldly left his son behind till his heart thawed out, and he went back to hug him goodbye. Later, he was secretly smuggled into North Korea, while Suk-ju reported his plan to stop the war to his superiors. Cheol arrived at the surgery room and did his best to save the supreme leader, but nothing seemed to be working. Suddenly, the doors opened and Hoon was ushered in by gunmen to threaten Cheol to save the leader or else. Meanwhile, South Korea was in crisis as they learned that the US had approved an attack on North Korea. While Cheol was desperately trying to complete his surgery, the whole of South Korea was in chaos with citizens begging for visas to leave the country. Suk-ju entered the US embassy to confront them when the man told him the attack had been called off. Apparently, Cheol had managed to save the supreme leader's life and his son's. After, Hoon met a girl in the hospital called Jae-hee, and he instantly fell in love with her. His father told him it was time for them to leave, so he gave her a bracelet he made and told her his name. Later, Cheol and Hoon were on their way back when they noticed they were being ambushed by North Korean soldiers. They were escorted to an open field where a group of gunmen were ordered to shoot them down. Meanwhile, the bastard Suk-ju decided to take full credit for saving the two countries from war when a woman showed up at his debut, screaming for her son, so Suk-ju ordered his agent to take care of her. Back in North Korea, Cheol and Hoon were surprisingly spared by a North Korean spy named Jin-soo, who told them their South Korean identity was now dead. Years later, Hoon was grown up and madly in love with Jae-hee, who still had the bracelet he made for her. He took her to the roof of the university and asked her to marry him, so she accepted. On their way back, Jae-hee invited Hoon to dinner to meet her father, so Hoon returned home to put on his best suit. However, when his father saw him, he insisted they have to see their patients first. They head to a makeshift clinic for the poor citizens. There, Cheol tells Hoon to inject a drug into one of the patients, but Hoon objects since he's only been studying medicine for 2 months. However, Cheol reminds him he's read anatomy books 1,000 times and advises him to feel all that knowledge through his hands. Cheol channels his inner Jimmy Neutron and manages to inject the patient correctly, so his dad hands him flowers to go to Jae-hee's house. Hoon rushes over, but he finds that Jae-hee's house has been trashed and she's now missing. However, he hears her scream out for him, so he runs through the entire building till he finds her. Unfortunately, North Korean soldiers came to seize her, so she kissed Hoon goodbye as they dragged her away. Later, Hoon himself was seized by North Korean soldiers and taken to a secret facility, where Jin-soo forced him to work as a doctor for their leader and perform other heinous experiments on humans. 5 years later, Cheol goes to visit Hoon when he discovers Hoon has been sneaking out to look for Jae-hee, but when he warns Hoon to stop it, Hoon tells him to stay out of it. Later, a foreign ambassador was ushered in to watch Hoon perform an operation when the lights suddenly turned off. However, Hoon insisted he had performed the operation 1,000 times, so he continued the procedure, which ended up being a success. Afterward, Jin-soo came to assign him to a case where he would need to transfer a girl's kidney to her father to save his life, but Hoon refused to do it. The man said it was necessary to get the foreigners to donate free medical equipment, but Hoon still refused. On his way out, he saw them rolling the two patients in and suddenly noticed the bracelet he gave to Jae-hee and confirmed it was really her. Later, he visited them in their room and her father told him to save his daughter's life no matter what. On the day of the surgery, Jin-soo asked why it was the girl in there, so Hoon explained the procedure was easier to show on a female. After the surgery was a success, Jin-soo told Hoon he would need to go to Budapest to perform some more surgeries, but Hoon refused again, saying he had to attend to his patient. When he returned home, he met his father waiting for him, who told him to go to Budapest as it was his only chance to escape this place. Hoon would even get to go with Jae-hee, but he would never get to see his father again. Sewell tried to leave, but Hoon followed after him and insisted he couldn't leave him behind, so he directed his father on how to leave the facility without getting spotted. However, the lights all came on and Hoon immediately knew there was something wrong. He ran to check on his dad, but it was too late. The soldiers shot him down and surrounded him, but Hoon managed to hold his dad one last time as he passed away. The next day, Hoon agreed to go to Budapest, but Jin-soo suspected something was up and told his subordinates to find out how the female patient was connected to him. After Hoon had arrived at the Budapest hospital, Jin-soo showed up and said they had to oversee their investment. Later, he confronted Hoon about how strange it was that the patient went to the same university as him. Meanwhile, Agent Sunglasses met with someone who showed him footage that the South Korean embassy had collected. The agent recognized Hoon and asked why they were monitoring them, so the man said he had applied for asylum. Back in Budapest, Hoon secretly got medicine from the foreigner to use on Jae-hee. When Hoon went to Jae-hee, she regained consciousness and discovered that her dad had passed away, but Hoon told her to trust him as he administered some drops in her eyes. Suddenly, Jin-soo walked in and asked if Hoon was the one who applied for asylum, warning him not to try anything stupid. However, when Jin-soo left, he told his men to keep an eye on him, so they ended up cuffing Jae-hee to her bed. After, Hoon administered a drug that would stop her heartbeat. The hospital was alerted of the emergency, so the soldiers rushed to the room to find Hoon struggling to resuscitate her. He told them to remove the cuffs so he could use the defibrillators, but nothing seemed to work. When the foreigner arrived, he declared her dead and threatened to call off the deal, so Jin-soo followed after him, leaving two of his behind with Hoon. Hoon injected one of them, but the second one tried to stop him from going to Jae-hee. Hoon managed to fight him off and grabbed Jae-hee as he only had 3 minutes left to resuscitate her. While the North Korean soldiers were chasing after them, he escaped to a room where he performed CPR to bring her back. They eventually got out of the hospital and escaped on a bike, but the North Koreans began chasing them down. Even though they got cornered, Hoon managed to escape, but Jin-soo knew they would be heading for the South Korean embassy. Hoon and Jae-hee arrive at the embassy, where they think they'll finally be safe. Meanwhile, Seok-ju gets word of Hoon's attempt to access the embassy and explains that he can't allow anything to disrupt his campaign for Prime Minister. He sends word to the embassy and they end up closing the gate to Hoon and Jae-hee, who have no choice but to run as the North Korean soldiers catch up to them. They eventually come to a dead end on the bridge where Jae-hee gets shot and falls over, but Hoon manages to catch her. Just before the men can shoot at Hoon, a mystery sniper stops them from murdering him, and it turns out to be the Sunglasses agent. However, Jae-hee accepts they can't both survive, so she lets go and falls into the water. Hoon was about to jump in after her when the police showed up and carried him away. 2 years later, a hospital in Seoul was trying to assemble a team that would work on the Prime Minister, Seok-ju. Gum-wook was initially considered to lead the team, but when a patient he operated on suddenly developed complications, a young doctor named Jae-jun took over. He'd assembled a team of the best doctors in the hospital and replaced Hyung-wook. Hyung-wook got demoted by the director of the hospital, who told him to assemble a team that was better than Jae-jun's own if he wants to get back what he lost. Meanwhile, Hoon was just released from penitentiary and was picked up by his friend Chang-ya. On the way, she told him she was paying for her mom to be rescued from North Korea, but Hoon didn't believe it would happen. Later, Han was at a playground when he spotted a lost coin at the same time as a little girl. When she insisted it was hers, he discovered her finger had been broken and told her to go to the hospital for it. Later, Hoon met up with Chong-ni and Mr. Lim, who helped her reunite with her mother. Hoon begged him to help find Jae-hee, but the man demanded he pay him in dollars first. Hoon got some small cash to beg the man, so he showed him footage of Jae-hee in a camp calling out for him. Meanwhile, Hyung-wook blamed his assistant, who looked like Korean Jack Black, for costing him his position in the department and fired him. At the same time, Jae-jun met up with his girlfriend Soo-gyun and shared a passionate kiss with her, but he offered to finish that off later as he had to head to the hospital. Inside, he met with the balding Jack Black, who reminded him he did as he asked, so Jae-jun promised to reward him later. Meanwhile, Soo-byun returned home where her half-brother seized the car she was driving, causing her to break the windshield. When they went inside, their father, who is also the director of the hospital, dismissed his son for being dumber than a lamppost and insisted that his daughter would run the hospital instead. The next day, Chang-yi asked Hoon to cover her work shift while she showed her mom around, so Hoon went to the hospital to replace their empty water bottles. There he ran into the girl from the playground and her father, who seemed to be in terrible shape. He took them to the radiology lab to get tested, but while they were there, the girl's father got worse. She tried to ask for help, but all the doctors were busy with patients that were rushed in from an accident, and they all ignored her. Hoon watched as the girl screamed out and finally got one of the doctor's attention, Soo-hyun. When Soo-hyun asked about the man's condition, she told a doctor to take him to get an x-ray, so Hoon went along. However, on the way, the man collapsed, so Hoon instructed the doctor and nurses to perform CPR and use the defibrillator on him. But what he really needed was surgery. Hoon waited with the girl, but all the other doctors were too busy to respond, so the girl begged him to do it himself and offered the coin from earlier as payment. Hoon agreed, so he dressed up as a surgeon and entered the surgery room, making the other doctors think it was Jae-jun, but they quickly discovered it was not. Before they could stop him, Hoon started the surgery in a precise way they had never seen before while Hyun-wook was watching everything. Soo-hyun joined the operation team, but when she noticed the imposter among them, she told them to shut everything down. However, when the other doctors disagreed, she stormed out to get security. There, she saw the little girl and decided to hold off, but when she went back, Hoon was already done. Hoon was on his way to escape when he dropped his coin and Soo-hyun stopped it along with the security guard. While they were talking, Soo-hyun got a call that the patient had gone into critical condition, so she planned to call the police, but Hoon gave a recommendation to stabilize him, which was the same one Jae-jun gave. Jae-jun came and told him never to show his face in their hospital again, while Soo-hyun discovered that she kept his coin. After, Hoon met up with Chang-yi when Hyun-wook suddenly called out for him, causing him to run for it. Suddenly, Chang-yi noticed a doctor who looked like the girl Hoon had been looking for and decided to head back. Hyun-wook had followed Hoon home and was hoping to talk to him when Chang-yi returned and told him what she saw, so he asked Hyun-wook for a favor. Meanwhile, Jae-hee was transferring an old lady to the hospital and gave her the red bracelet to hold on to. At the same time, Hoon was looking for her, but when he tracked down the Jae-hee in the hospital, it was the wrong person. Hyun-wook offered to help him find his mystery woman when Hoon suddenly spotted her through the window. He immediately ran after her, but she kept eluding him, until she drove off in a paramedic van. After, Hoon went to interrogate Mr. Lim, but he claimed that Jae-hee couldn't have been the woman he saw. When Hoon left, a man in black appeared and paid Mr. Lim for his silence. Later, Hyun-wook approached Hoon again, but this time they offered him money to join the medical team and Hoon agreed. At the next hospital meeting, Hyun-wook showed the staff a video of Hoon's work and recommended he join the hospital. When they all agreed on how remarkable the work was, Hyun-wook called Hoon in. At the same time, a man named Mr. Choi came to see the director of the hospital and told him he had a recommendation too. Back at the meeting, the doctors demanded to know what school Hoon graduated from, but once he revealed it was a North Korean school, everyone gave up on him, including Hyun-wook. Later, the director called Jae-jun and Hyun-wook to his office and told them to hire Hoon. He told them their teams will be competing to see who is the best and the loser would be punished. Because of this, Hyun-wook approached Hoon again and waved a couple of bills in his face to get him back on board. Hoon then used the money to motivate Mr. Lim to get Jae-hee back, but only promised to pay after. Meanwhile, the director and his dumbass son visit his ex-mistress, who is also Soo-hyun's mother. However, when he consulted Jae-jun about operating on her, Jae-jun said the success rate was slim. Sang-jin took Soo-hyun to see her mother, hoping to spite her, but Soo-hyun tried to act like it didn't bother her and left. When she returned outside, Hoon said the old woman had signed a do not resuscitate form, which shocked Soo-hyun, but she asked them not to meddle with it. That night, Soo-hyun went to dinner with the rest of the Jae-jun's team, but she left early since her mind was elsewhere. Meanwhile, her mom went into critical condition, and despite the DNR she signed, Hoon tried to give her CPR. When Soo-hyun returned to the hospital, she asked if the old woman had died, but she discovered she was now in the ICU. She was furious with Hoon as she explained that cancer patients have to go through so much pain, but Hoon insisted the CPR wouldn't have worked if she didn't have the will to live. When he went back into the room, he found the red bracelet he made for Jae-hee, so he decided to call the hospital that transferred her there. Unfortunately, the Jae-hee look-alike walked away just before he could speak to her, and the nurse told him the doctor wasn't the type to wear jewelry. However, when Jae-hee went outside, she met with a man who turned out to be Jin-soo while Mr. Lim spied on them. Back at the hospital, Hyun-wook told Hoon not to operate on the old woman since there was no way she'd survive the operation, but Hoon insisted he would save her because he had something to ask her. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun was looking over her mom when Jae-jun appeared, so she revealed that the woman was her mother. She then met with her father, who was sad, but they both agreed it was better to end her suffering, so Soo-hyun went to her room to pull the plug. Suddenly, her mom held her hand and opened her eyes, making her realize she couldn't let go. She immediately called Jae-jun to ask for his help, but Jae-jun ignored her call, so he wouldn't put his position on the line. When Soo-hyun felt the coin in her pocket, she realized Hoon was her only hope and rushed to him. Even though he told her there was no point, she handed him the coin and begged him to save her mom. With this, Hoon suited up and headed into the surgery room where Soo-hyun was waiting. The director tried to stop them, but Hoon said he had already been paid. Unfortunately, the surgery ended up being a failure and Soo-hyun's mother died, leaving her devastated at the realization. Hoon held her to comfort her just as Jae-jun walked in and saw them, so he walked away angrily. Later, Soo-hyun went to her mother's house but was locked out until Jae-hee showed up and explained that she was her mother's home doctor. When they went in, Jae-hee told Soo-hyun all the things her mother said about her and showed her she'd been watching over her this whole time. So Soo-hyun finally got some closure. Meanwhile, Hoon stood trial before Jae-jun and the other doctors who queried him over the death of the patient. When Soo-hyun walked in, Hoon apologized for failing to save the patient's life, making Jae-jun question why he operated on her in the first place. Hoon claimed it was because he was paid, which is no different from the rest of the doctors. When he stormed out, Hyun-wook told him he needed to beg the director so he doesn't fire him. They found the director, but despite getting on their knees to apologize, he told Hoon to get out of his hospital. On his way out, Hoon met up with Chang-ye when they suddenly got a call from Mr. Lim. He said he had finally found Jae-hee and asked for them to bring the money and meet him at home. When they got home, they found Mr. Lin waiting on the other side of the street, but Jin-soo had followed him to silence him. He shot at a truck which smashed into Mr. Lim's car, leaving him in critical condition. Hyun-wook showed up as Hoon rushed him into this clinic and used the force to determine that a piece of bone was stuck in his heart. Hyun-wook told Hoon to wait for the ambulance to arrive, but Hoon said he needed to operate on him immediately or else he'd die. Hyun-wook assisted as Hoon started the surgery, but there wasn't enough suction power for Hoon to see what he was doing. However, Hoon said that he could get the bone out and stitch the wound. After he finished, the ambulance arrived and rushed Mr. Lim to the hospital where he was taken in for a proper surgery, but the doctors said there was nothing more to do since Hoon had done a perfect job. Meanwhile, Jae-jun was drinking himself silly with one of the other doctors. He told him about a brave knight who was trying to win a castle by winning the heart of the princess, but his friend suggested that he needed to take love out of the equation if he wanted to succeed. With this, Jae-jun headed to the hospital where he found Soo-hyun leaving. He told her he was sorry for everything and confessed that he was jealous of how much she defended Hoon, so she thanked him for his honesty, and they finally made up. After, Soo-hyun went home but was shocked to find out she'd been kicked off the hospital's management team and replaced by Korean Chuck Bassett. The next day, Hoon was talking to the police about the incident while Jin-soo snuck Mr. Lim out of the hospital. By the time Hoon realized, it was too late and Jin-soo had gotten rid of his phone so they could never track him. Hoon was back to having no leads on Jae-hee's location when he realized that the hospital might have caught her on the security camera. However, the men in charge of the footage wouldn't let him in because he wasn't authorized. When that failed, Chang-ye told Hoon that her mom had seen Jae-hee in a North Korean camp, but according to her, Jae-hee became very sick, and then they were told that she died. Hoon stormed out, refusing to believe it, and while Chang-ye tried to convince him, Soo-hyun overheard them talking. She later asked Chang-ye about the story, and she explained that Hoon was obsessed with finding his dead girlfriend. Soo-hyun asked Hoon herself, and when he insisted she was still alive, she offered to help him check the security footage. They snuck into the room and found footage of a woman who looked like Jae-hee, but Hoon wasn't sure from the angle. Suddenly, the ugly stepbrother caught them and had them thrown in prison for trespassing. Meanwhile, the Jae-hee lookalike was actually working with Jin-soo, and she told him that the old woman had ruined their plan now that Hoon thinks Jae-hee is dead. At the same time, the director finally bailed Hoon and Soo-hyun out of jail and scolded his idiot son for risking the hospital's image. After, Soo-hyun went home with Hoon, where he showed her the video of Jae-hee, and she recognized her as the woman who was at her mother's house. They immediately rushed to her hospital to ask about her, but the nurse had no idea where she was. Meanwhile, Jin-soo met up with Jae-hee and wanted to shoot her since their mission was ruined, but Jae-hee suggested she had another way to save the mission. Later, Hoon and Soo-hyun were about to leave when Jae-hee called out for Soo-hyun and revealed herself. Jin-soo watched from above as he remembered what happened to him after Hoon escaped. He was tortured and accused of helping Hoon escape, and though he denied all the accusations, it still cost him his finger. Now he wished more than anything to just walk right up and shoot Hoon dead, but it would disrupt their plans. Just then, Hoon was calling out for Jae-hee, but she didn't seem to recognize him or know who he was referring to. She insisted she was Sung-hee and stormed inside when he didn't listen. He followed her inside and asked why she was acting like she didn't know him, but she told him she had a patient to attend to. When Hoon refused to listen, she slapped him and reminded him that as a doctor, the patient is always more important. After she agreed to meet him later, Soo-hyun dragged Hoon out of the hospital while Jae-hee returned to Jin-soo and said their plan was back in motion. However, the matter of Hoon getting fired was still a problem, so they needed someone powerful to get the director to change his mind. Because of this, Jin-soo secretly met with Seok-ju and warned him to get the director to change his mind or else their plan would be ruined. Seok-ju was constantly watched, so it would be difficult, but he trusted his agent to get it done. Meanwhile, Hoon went to drink his sorrows away with Soo-hyun, who showed him pictures of the woman claiming to be Sung-hee. This made Hoon doubt some more, but he said he'd never let go of Jae-hee, which made Soo-hyun jealous of how much he loved her. When Hoon tried to get up, he almost fell, so Soo-hyun helped him back to his seat and touched his face tenderly while Jae-jun happened to watch. He called Soo-hyun and asked where she was, but she lied that she was at her mother's house alone, making him angry. After, Jae-hee showed up, but Hoon was too wasted to talk to her, so she helped Soo-hyun get into her mother's place for the night. The next day, Seok-ju found a way to meet with the director and told him to give Hoon another chance. Because of this, Hyun-wook went to deliver the news to Hoon and Soo-hyun and bring Hoon back to the hospital. On the way, Hoon told him about the issue with his dead or alive girlfriend and insisted she was the one. When Hyun-wook asked how he could be sure, Hoon decided he'd ask Chang-ye's mom since they were in camp together. Unfortunately, Jin-soo had other plans as they needed her to demonstrate Jae-hee's skills for the Prime Minister. He injected something into her IV, so when Hoon reached the hospital, Chang-ye told him her mom had suddenly gone unconscious. They quickly rushed her into surgery with Jae-jun leading the charge and Jae-hee handling anesthetics expertly well. When the surgery was successful, Jae-jun asked to speak with Hoon and threatened him to stay away from Soo-hyun, but she happened to be walking by at that moment. Hoon left and Jae-jun apologized for losing his temper, so she forgave him, but when he asked her to dinner, she said she already had plans. Meanwhile, Hyun-wook told Hoon they had to go beg the director, but on the way, they ran into Mr. Choi, who Hoon recognized as the man who tricked him into going to North Korea to threaten his father. Mr. Choi tried to apologize, but Hoon was having none of it till Mr. Choi pulled out a picture of the foreigner operating on Jae-hee and assuring him she's not dead. Meanwhile, Jae-hee injected the old woman with something that made her go unconscious again, so they rushed to attend to her, wondering what was causing this. Later, when she was stable, she saw Jae-hui and admitted that she looked like the one she knew, but she assured Hoon that that one died. However, Mr. Choi pulled him aside and said Jae-hee was surely alive, and he was going to North Korea to find her. When Hoon offered to go too, he refused and said he'd see him before he left. Later, Hyun-wook asked if Hoon knew anything about Jae-hee that could prove she was the same person. So Hoon mentioned that she had only one kidney. They both rushed to look at her medical record, which was illegal, but when they checked, they saw she had 2 kidneys. However, Hoon was still not convinced and needed to listen to her heartbeat, but he did when they were at university. He rushed to her and held her close, but he wasn't sure what he believed. Jae-hee stormed off, and when Soo-hyun asked what that was about, he told her that the heartbeat of 2 people destined to be together are the same. He jokingly demonstrated it on her, but she pushed him away angrily and left. Meanwhile, Jae-hee was tending to a pregnant patient when she noticed something was wrong. Hoon arrived and used the force to determine that she needed surgery. They rushed her in with Jae-hee as the anesthetist and Sun-hyun as the assistant. Hyun-wook noticed how good Jae-hee was at her job, but he was still afraid that she was a North Korean spy, so alopecia Jack Black suggested they make her take a new medical checkup in their hospital. Eventually, the surgery was successful, and the woman safely delivered twins. Meanwhile, Hyun-wook told the admin guy to get Jae-hee to do another checkup, or they'll all go to jail. After, Hyun-wook told Hoon about his plan, so they waited till Jae-hee was done with the medical tests and stole the CD to confront her. Unfortunately, it still said she had 2 kidneys, and Jae-hee was furious. They would do something illegal, but after much begging, she agreed not to press charges. Later that night, Mr. Choi went to see Hoon and told him the real reason his father had to go to North Korea. Apparently, Cheol was suing the hospital for malpractice based on a failed surgery led by Mr. Choi himself. It would have cost the hospital its reputation, so they conspired with Seok-ju to have Cheol go to North Korea and put an end to the lawsuit. Mr. Choi claimed they did everything to get them out, but Hoon insisted it was a lie and told him of the horrors they had to go through. Mr. Choi then handed Hoon the last of Cheol's belongings he could find, which Hoon was grateful for, but he told Mr. Choi not to bother him again. Before leaving, Mr. Cheol explained that the patient that the lawsuit was based died. His wife died soon after, leaving behind an orphan son who was adopted by an American family. Meanwhile, Jae-jun and Soo-hyun arrived at the same time and had dinner with the director. On the way up, Soo-hyun put her head on his chest to hear his heartbeat and see if they were destined to be together. At dinner, the director told them to get married already, but they both agreed it was their decision to make. Suddenly, Soo-hyun got a call and said she had to leave, but on the way, she couldn't stop thinking about her hug with Hoon and comparing it with the one she had with Jae-jun. The next day, Hoon found the woman who just delivered twins being harassed at the admin desk. When he took her back to clean her wounds, he discovered the twins were sick, but she had no money to pay for their treatment. Later, Hoon was discussing with Hyun-wook when he asked who was so important that they needed the best team to operate on. That's when Mr. Choi showed up again and revealed it was the Prime Minister. Hoon was furious and wondered how they could expect him to save his life after everything they went through. He refused to do it and even went to Jae-jun to quit the competition, leaving his lab coat behind. On his way, he heard a commotion and discovered that the mother of twins had pulled a knife on the nurses and was insisting she die with her kids. Jae-hee told Hoon that the babies had cardiac abnormalities, so Hoon went outside to confirm it. After seeing their scan on the monitors, he asked them to prepare the operating room, but the ugly half-brother showed up to stop him. He insisted they kick the patients out since they're thousands of dollars in debt. Suddenly, a scream came from the room, so Hoon went to check on them while Soo-hyun stopped her brother from going inside. One of the babies had stopped breathing, so Hoon had to perform emergency CPR to save the baby's life. After, he told them to take the babies to the ICU while he went to meet with the director. At that moment, the Prime Minister was visiting the hospital when Hoon stormed in. He decided to continue with the competition on the condition that the hospital would pay for it. As he was about to leave, Seok-ju told Hoon that he had high hopes for him, which pissed Hoon off. They later met in the bathroom, and Hoon attacked Seok-ju, threatening to end his life if he's the one who gets to operate on him. However, Seok-ju threatened that if he didn't cooperate, Hoon might never see his girlfriend again. After, the director asked Seok-ju what was going on, so Seok-ju revealed that Hoon was the son of Cheol who almost ruined the hospital. After hearing this, the director confronted Mr. Choi, wondering why he would do this to him. When Mr. Choi insisted he give Hoon a chance, the director said the competition would settle everything. On his way out, Mr. Choi got a call about the orphan from the lawsuit who was apparently in Korea under an alias. The caller was in the hospital and entered an office which turned out to be Jae-jun's, who greeted the man fondly. When the man saw the castle Jae-jun had been building, he asked what he would do once it was finished, and Jae-jun said he would break it. Meanwhile, Hoon asked Jae-hee if she would help him operate on the twins, and she agreed. Later, they went to lunch with Soo-hyun, and they were gisting about Hoon's girlfriend when Jae-hee got a call from Jin-soo. When she met with him, he told her to join Jae-jun's team instead, and this was because Seok-ju believed Jae-jun was good enough to operate on him and he wouldn't need Hoon. Meanwhile, Jae-jun and Hoon were assembling their teams for the competition. The hair-resistant doctor offered to be Hoon's first assistant, and Soo-hyun was to be Jae-jun's assistant, but the anesthetist insisted she wasn't good enough to do it. Jae-jun said he wouldn't change his mind, and when everyone left, he assured Soo-hyun she was good enough and not to mind the others. Meanwhile, Jae-hee remembered her conversation with Jin-soo, warning her that Hoon must win or they'll all die. When Jae-hee saw the other team's anesthetist lamenting about Jin-ju protecting his girlfriend, she hatched a plan so they both got what they wanted. Later, Hyun-wook tells Hoon that Jae-hee is no longer planning to help them, and when Hoon confronts her himself, she says she can't cause it's her day off. When Hoon and Hyun-wook think they're out of options, the other team's anesthetist shows up and says she'll replace Jae-hee. Jae-jun hears of this and asks Jae-hee to join him instead, but she still refuses, which means he doesn't have an anesthetist. The director visits him in the office and tells him that if he ever wants to take over the hospital, he needs to get the stranger out of it and win the competition. This makes Jae-jun reconsider whether Soo-hyun should be his first assistant. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun asks Hoon for help with being a good first assistant, so Hoon shows her in the most cliché way possible, just as Jae-jun catches them getting chummy. He calls Soo-hyun away and tells her she can no longer be the first assistant, because at least the other doctors don't need help from Hoon. At the same time, the Hairless Wonder deliberately breaks his hand to sabotage Hoon's team, leaving them without a first assistant. Because of this, Hoon finds Soo-hyun crying and asks her to join his team instead, and she agrees. After, the anesthetist tells Hoon she's going back to Jae-jun's team and calls Jae-hee to confirm that she'll return to Hoon's team too. However, Jae-hee goes to a secret meeting with Jin-soo, while Chang-yae secretly follows them at Hoon's request. Meanwhile, both teams prepare to start the surgery, and as Hoon is about to go in, Chang-yae calls him to report the scene with Jae-hee and says they're about to shoot her. When Hoon hears this, he tries to leave the hospital immediately, but Soo-hyun stops him and reminds him to think of the children's lives. He manages to calm down and retake his post, but when Soo-hyun asks where Jae-hee is, he says she'll be there. Meanwhile, Mr. Choi explains the rules of the competition and says the winner is whoever has a successful surgery or the fastest time. However, the only thing left is Jae-hee, who is still nowhere to be found. Back at the shady meeting, Jae-hee and Jin-soo have a standoff with the South Koreans until the Prime Minister shows up and allows Jae-hee to join Hoon's team on the condition that she tells him that she really is Jae-hee. After proving it, she meets with Jin-soo, who warns her that if Hoon loses the competition, they will both die. Jae-hee rushes to the hospital while Mr. Choi declares the competition open, putting Jae-jun's team in the lead. However, when Jae-hee finally showed up, she was so fast that Hoon was able to start the incision at the same time as Jae-jun. Both teams were neck and neck until Soo-hyun accidentally cut one of the blood vessels. Hoon told her to stitch it back, but she started having a meltdown until she remembered the words everyone else had said to her and decided she would fix her own mistake. Unfortunately, her determination was not enough, and Jae-jun's team ended up finishing first, making them the winners of the competition. Afterward, the director told Mr. Choi that would be Hoon's last operation, and even though Mr. Choi tried to convince him, he wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, Hoon was trying to look for Jae-hee when Chang-yae showed up and asked if that woman was really Jae-hee. Hoon assured her that she was and told her to keep what she had seen a secret. At the same time, Jin-soo called Jae-hee, and though she convinced him that the plan could still take place, he said it was too late. As Hoon was searching for Jae-hee, Jin-soo was tailing him so he could put a bullet in his head, but he kept getting interrupted. When he finally got a clean shot, Jae-hee pulled him out of the way and saved him. Suddenly, an alarm went off and the doctors rushed to the ICU to discover that the baby Jae-jun worked on was now in critical condition. This meant that Hoon's team officially won, and Jae-jun had to go back into surgery. There he dismissed his first assistants, so Soo-hyun came to replace him, but when he saw her he screamed at her to get out while the director watched. Meanwhile, Hoon was back to looking for Jae-hee again, and this time he followed her car back to his place. When he entered, she finally admitted that she was Jae-hee, and they kissed as they were finally reunited. While Hoon and Jae-hee were busy with an intense workout session, Sokju's agent met with Jin-soo and ordered him to start Phase 2. Meanwhile, Hoon woke up alone and was worried that it was just a one-night stand hallucination. But when he went outside, Jae-hee pulled up and continued getting lovey-dovey with Hoon. Hoon called Hyungwook and told her he was coming in late, but in reality, he planned to spend the entire day montaging with Jae-hee. After having some fun, Jae-hee asked why Hoon wasn't curious about what happened, but Hoon said he didn't need to know and just wanted to take her somewhere. Meanwhile, Jae-jun went to see the director and asked for another chance, but when the director wasn't budging, he threatened to leave the hospital. The director told them he could either work at a branch or leave, so Jae-jun stormed out of the office angry. After, Soo-hyun went to see him in his office to comfort him, but Jae-jun acted rudely to her and asked why she helped Hoon. When she said it was all to save the babies' lives, Jae-jun called bullshit, so she told him that's exactly why he lost, because he was more focused on winning than saving a life. Meanwhile, Hoon and Jae-hee arrived at Ship Harbor where a trusted friend could help them escape the country. Jae-hee was scared to go, but Hoon told her to trust him and come along. Back at the hospital, everyone is beginning to wonder why Hoon hasn't answered his calls, and no one has heard from Jae-hee either. Soon, even the Prime Minister knows and wonders if Hoon will actually be able to escape. Unfortunately, Hoon and Jae-hee get ambushed by North Korean soldiers, and when they try to escape, Jin-soo finally reveals himself and sends his men to knock him out. When he wakes up, he's tied to a chair and Jin-soo orders for Jae-hee to be brought in. He beats her up a bit and almost assaults her, causing Hoon to beg him to let her go. Jin-soo tells him that in exchange for her safety, he'll have to operate on the Prime Minister's heart, and no one can know who Jae-hee really is. Afterward, Jin-soo tells Jae-hee she did a good job, and they continue with this phase of the plan. Later, Chang-yi finds Hoon passed out in the car, so she wakes him up, and he immediately starts looking for Jae-hee. Just then, he gets a call from Soo-hyun, who says everyone is waiting for him at a party, including Jae-hee. Meanwhile, Jae-jun goes to ask Suk-ju to help him get back into the hospital, but when Suk-ju claims he doesn't have the power to do so, Jae-ju tells him that he knows he's the reason Hoon got back in, and asks him to do the same for him. After he leaves, Suk-jun's agent hands him a file on Jae-ju, revealing who he really is. Meanwhile, Hoon arrives at the party and tells Jae-hee that they need to find a way to escape again, but Jae-hee breaks down and tells him it's too risky, and he should just do as they say. So Hoon agrees to make her happy. At the same time, Jae-hee goes to the director's house and kneels in the rain to ask for another chance. However, as he begs, he remembers the last time he was there as a kid, asking why they murdered his father while the director turned his back on him. The director refused him again and went inside, but he got a call from Suk-ju, who told him to hire Jae-jun again. However, the director intended to make Jae-jun grovel before accepting him back because he had threatened him earlier. During that time, the admin guy showed up and reported Hoon and Hyun-wook illegally going through Jae-hee's medical records. Later, when the director felt Jae-jun had soaked up enough rain, he went out and asked him why he was so persistent, so Jae-jun said he wanted to make the hospital the best in the world and win Soo-hyun back. However, his inner child was screaming that he would have his revenge. The director finally took him in and gave him proof that Hoon had committed a serious crime, which is how he could get back into the competition. The next day, the doctors all woke up in Soo-hyun's house with a serious hangover. However, some moving men entered with Jae-hee, who said she had just rented that house. It turns out that there was a mix-up with the landlord and both of them had rented the property. Jae-hee had paid first, so she was technically the owner, but later at work, she told Soo-hyun she could stay with her till she found a new place. After, Jae-hee pulls Hoon aside to ask why he's got a long strand of hair on him. He explains that it was Soo-hyun's and goes to trouble for it, but while they're messing around, Jae-hee watches them and gets jealous. Later, Jae-jun asks to meet with Hoon and suggests they have 2 more rounds of the competition to determine the winner. Hoon refuses to play with the patients' lives anymore, but Jae-jun warns him he'd regret refusing his offer. Because of this, Jae-jun calls the police and has Hyun-wook and Hoon arrested for illegally looking at Jae-hee's medical records. After, Soo-hyun confronts Jae-jun for sending Hoon to prison, so he blames her for only thinking about Hoon all the time. Soo-hyun insists Hoon only loves his missing girlfriend anyway and tells Jae-jun that he's pushing her away with his actions. Later, Soo-hyun tells Jae he'd help clear Hoon's name at the police station, but when they get there, they say only the person who pressed charges can remove it. Just then, Jae-jun arrives and repeats his offer to Hoon, adding that he gets to pick the patient to work on. Hoon looks to Jae-hee, who signals for him to agree, so he does, and they all leave the station. On the way back, Hoon asks her why she wants him to operate on the Prime Minister, so she tells him that she has a plan for them to be free, but it can only work if he does the operation. Hoon agrees to trust her, so she drops him at the hospital, but while he's outside, a woman comes out of a taxi looking ill. She goes to meet her husband and son in a wheelchair, but while she's there, she collapses, so Hoon calls for help getting her inside immediately. When they get inside, Hoon tells the nurses to prepare for surgery, but another department comes to claim the patient and demand that they treat her. The director shows up and sides with them, but when Hoon argues, he pulls him aside and reveals that he knows he's Jewel's son. He then reminds Hoon what happened to his father when he tried to play hero too. Later, the husband of the patient goes to see Hoon and asks what's going on. The doctors had said there was bleeding in his wife's heart, but it would naturally go away. However, Hoon explained that if they were wrong, it could become something serious and she could go into shock. Suddenly, the man got a call that informed him that his wife had gone into shock, but the doctors managed to stabilize her again, claiming it wasn't serious. The woman's family begged Hoon to operate on her, so Hoon said he'd consult with the other doctors, but when he did, the stubborn old man said he wasn't allowed to take other doctors' patients, and they wouldn't operate on her. After this, Hyun-wook told Hoon to turn a blind eye, so they wouldn't get in trouble, but Hoon insisted he couldn't just let her die, so he met with Jae-hee and the other doctors to assemble a team to secretly work on her. However, before they could start the operation, the other department stormed in and stopped them from going any further. When Jae-jun came to find out what was happening, Hoon said he had found a patient for their next competition. Hoon explains the situation and tells Jae-jun that he'll win if he operates on the woman, and it goes successfully. Meanwhile, the stubborn old geezer confesses to the director that they let a resident perform the surgery on the woman which caused the bleeding. The director ordered them to send the resident to a branch and shut him up, warning that if this got out, the hospital would be in big trouble. At the same time, Hoon goes to check on the patient and tells her son that Jae-jun will be doing the operation, and there's nothing to worry about since he's a good doctor. Meanwhile, Seok-ju's agent goes to deliver a doll to a woman in the psychiatric ward who happens to be Hoon's mother that he kidnapped 20 years ago. Later, Hyun-wook tells Hoon about the other department's mistake and warns that they might get sued. As the news of the mistake spreads, Jae-jun goes to talk to the director and tells him that Hoon has chosen that patient for the competition. The director refuses since they might get sued, so he comes up with an idea and calls Hyun-wook and Hoon to his office. There he announces that the patient would indeed be used for the competition, however, whoever operates on her would lose. Jae-jun immediately backs down, so Hoon says he'll operate on her instead and goes to tell the patient's family the good news. After, he heads to the front desk and finds Jin-soo waiting for him. They head to Hoon's place and there, Jin-soo tells him that if he accomplishes the mission, they'll let him and Jae-hee go free. At the same time, the director reminds Jae-jun of what's at stake if he wants to take over the hospital. When Jae-jun goes back to think about it, he remembers when his father was sick and he just wanted him to get better. With this, he goes to apologize to the patient and suddenly meets her son, who reminds him of his younger self. After talking to the boy for a while, the boy makes him promise to operate on his mom if Hoon can't do it for any reason. The next day, Hoon goes to the hospital and starts preparing his team to operate on the woman. Jae-hee pulls him aside to remind him of Jin-soo's warning, but when Hoon says he doesn't care, Jin-soo appears and takes him outside to threaten him. He holds Jae-hee hostage and threatens to end her life if he doesn't cooperate, so Hoon reluctantly agrees. When he returns to the hospital, the patient has another shock, and the old fart manages to resuscitate her, but still refuses to give her an operation. The patient's son asks Hoon to do his thing, but when Hoon sees Jin-soo standing there, he has no choice but to leave. Later, Jae-jun hears that Hoon has refused to do the surgery and finds the patient's son outside his office. The boy begs him to do it instead, but Jae-jun enters his office and ignores him till his father sadly rolls him away. After, Jae-jun goes to confront Hoon about quitting, but Hoon insists he can't do it because he's only been pretending to be a real doctor. Jae-jun angrily storms out and assembles a team to do it instead, warning them that they might get fired for helping. As they wheel the woman into surgery, Jae-jun tells her son he'll handle things, but when the director hears about it, he storms to the surgery room angrily. The operation is already in progress, but the director phones and demands that they stop the surgery or they'll never practice again. Jae-jun insists that they can just apologize to the family and they won't sue them, but the director doesn't agree. Suddenly, the first assistant makes the wrong cut and the excess blood stops him from seeing where to stitch. The director tells Hyun-wook to prepare a lawsuit against Jae-jun for killing the patient, planning to pin it all on him, but Hoon trips him and quickly rushes out. The patient's life is hanging in the balance and the first assistant remains frozen in fear when Hoon walks in to replace him. He tells the doctors to be proud of themselves and look up confidently. After, Hoon puts his hand inside and determines where the bleeding is coming from, so they're able to suction it and stitch it up, stabilizing the patient. Hoon tells Jae-jun he'll take over, so Jae-jun heads out and apologizes to the family on behalf of the hospital. When he asks if they'll sue, the man says he's not sure yet. Later, Jae-jun sits in his office and apologizes to his father for failing to avenge him. Soo-hyun walks in and says she's proud of him, so he asks her to come with him. But Soo-hyun pulls away and tells him that she'll make sure he doesn't get fired. Meanwhile, Jae-hee goes to scold Hoon for doing something reckless, but Hoon tells her he can't believe she'd expect him to watch as a patient dies, and tells her to leave. When she leaves, she meets Jin-soo, who's on his way to end Hoon, but she grabs his gun and pushes him down, insisting that she'll do things her way from now. At the same time, Soo-hyun talks to her father about Jae-ju, so they agree that if the family doesn't sue, he'll get to keep his job. The next day, Soo-hyun goes to see Hoon and finds him eating instant food which isn't good for him. She asks for his help with convincing the family not to sue, so they go to meet with them. But the father says he only needs the cardiology department to apologize to him first. Unfortunately, when Hoon and Soo-hyun go to ask them to, they refuse. Hoon comes up with an idea to threaten them using the resident they sent away, so he pulls some strings with some gang members he once helped out, and they help him track down the resident. When they return to the hospital, they tell the department to apologize or they'll use him against them, so they set up a meeting with the family and finally apologize. The man gets angry that it took them so long to apologize, but his son convinces him not to sue since they're the ones who will help them if they ever get sick again. After that's done, Hoon and Soo-hyun leave and watch a mother seize a dirty doll from her child. When Hoon picks it up, a woman from the psychiatric ward comes to get it and calls it her son. Hoon feels there's something about her, but a nurse comes to escort her back to her room. Later, the news comes on and shows Seok-ju announcing that another hospital would operate on his heart. The director gets furious at the news, so he meets with Soon and Jae-jun and pardons all the doctors except Hoon. Afterward, Hoon says goodbye to the other doctors and even gives Soo-hyun his stethoscope as a gift. On his way out, Soo-hyun hands him his lab coat to keep, but Hoon throws it in the trash and leaves. Soo-hyun takes it out of the trash and keeps it, but when she tries to go back to her usual work, she keeps remembering the different moments she shared with Hoon and ends up crying in Jae-jun's arms. Meanwhile, the director meets with Seok-ju and asks what's going on, so Seok-ju says it's all part of his plan and gives him evidence to implicate the other hospital. At the same time, Hoon gets a surprise visit from Jae-jun, who wants to know why he helped him beg the patient's family. So Hoon says it's because he's a good doctor. Jae-jun is touched and suggests they go out for drinks instead of suffering Hoon's shit-tasting coffee. At the same time, Jae-hee and Soo-hyun are girl bonding when Soo-hyun asks for help with making curry, hoping to invite Hoon to come eat something other than instant food. Meanwhile, the boys bond over drinks, and when Jae-jun asks how Hoon got so skilled, Hoon says his father was a doctor. Before Jae-jun can probe more, Hoon says he needs to use the bathroom and runs off. While he's gone, Soo-hyun calls, so Jae-jun picks up. She tries to invite him over till she realizes it's Jae-jun and claims that it was Jae-hee who wanted to invite them over. When Hoon returns, Jae-jun asks if he has feelings for Soo-hyun, but Hoon laughs at the idea. Jae-jun says she might have feelings for him, but Hoon finds it so ridiculous that when they go to the girl's house, Hoon continues to mock the idea. Soo-hyun gets upset and storms out, so Jae-jun follows her and says she's overreacting, so she calms down and starts to cry. When Jae-jun returns, he continues talking with Hoon and asks what his father's name was, so Hoon says it was Cheol, which shocks Jae-jun, but Hoon suddenly has to leave. Later, Jae-jun calls his investigator and asks him to find out if the Cheol from the lawsuit ended up in North Korea. It turns out that when Jae-jun was a kid, they were relying on Cheol to testify in court, but he suddenly disappeared. The stress was too much for his mother, so she ended up dying, leaving him an orphan. Meanwhile, Hoon remembers the woman from the hospital who said she was waiting for her son. He decides to go to his father's old house and check for his mother's number. When he dials it, a woman picks up and asks if it's Hoon. Hoon says it is and asks about his mother, but the woman tells him she went to South Korea 20 years ago and never returned. After some more details, Hoon realizes the woman in the hospital is his mother and starts to cry. Suddenly, he gets a call from Seok-ju, who asks if he's seen his mother. When he threatens her, Hoon quickly rushes to the hospital to get her, but Seok-ju tells his goons to get her out first. However, by the time they go to her room, she's already missing. They search high and low for her, but no one can seem to find where she is, and even Jin-soo says he has no idea about it. Meanwhile, Jae-hee shows up at Chang-yi's house with Hoon's mother and tells her to keep it a secret from Hoon to protect him. When Hoon gets to the hospital and sees his mom is gone, he calls Seok-ju, but he doesn't answer. He tries to take a taxi, but the man says he was already paid to take him somewhere, so he follows it to meet Jae-hee. Jae-hee tells him his mother is safe and asks him to trust her, but Hoon is at his limit and doesn't know whether to believe she's Jae-hee anymore. She begs him to let her protect him for a change and asks for a month, so Hoon reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, news of a scandal with the rival hospital comes out, and the rector's hospital is now chosen to work on the prime minister again, but the catch is that he has to hire Hoon. Hoon is back at his clinic when a sick man stumbles in and asks for his help. Hoon looks at him and tells him he'll need surgery, but the man says he can't afford it and walks out. Just then, Hyun-wook shows up again and tells Hoon that he has to come back to the hospital and continue the competition, but while they're talking, Chang Yi brings the sick man back and says he's collapsed. They quickly rush him to the hospital and get him hooked up, but the balding doctor warns Hoon that they can't treat him without payment. Hoon tells him not to worry and heads to meet with the director and Jae-jun. He agrees to rejoin the competition and even calls the second match's loss as long as they use his new patient for the competition. After, Hoon and Jae-jun discuss the details and Jae-jun shows him a patient with a similar case that's about to get a heart transplant. Jae-jun will work on that patient, but since Hoon's patient doesn't have a donor, they'll use a VAD instead and the hospital will pay for it. Jae-jun reports their deal to the director, who agrees to it immediately as he reveals that the patient has a blood coagulation disorder and cannot survive a transplant or VAD. Meanwhile, Hoon meets with Jae-hee and tells her he can't wait without knowing her plan. After threatening to smash his hand, Jae-hee reveals that the surgery was never for the Prime Minister, but it's actually for the President. Seok-ju was going to threaten him to mess up the surgery on purpose, so the President would go into a coma and Seok-ju would become the President in his place. However, Jae-hee planned to wake him up and promised to help him in return for protection. Hoon says her plan is ass cheeks, but she insists that she wants to protect him, and now that he knows he doesn't have to win the competition anymore, she'll join Jae-jun's team and sabotage it herself. Afterward, they return to the hospital and get ready to go into surgery. Hoon tells Jae-hee that he'll go along with the original plan and win the competition, so she won't be in it alone. However, the director has planned to make sure he fails, as he instructed the shady doctor to make sure the operation isn't successful. While they're all preparing, one of the nurses begins to suspect the shady doctor and tells them to cross-check the details of the patient. As they check, Hoon and Jae-jun meet, and he tells Hoon that he knows his father worked for the North Korean leader, so he must have had a good life. He storms off and Hoon wonders why he's suddenly hostile again. When he returns to the operating room, he discovers that the patient has a blood coagulation disorder, which throws them into chaos. However, Hoon suggests they perform another riskier surgery called SAVOR. The first assistant warns him that they didn't get his family's consent, which could put them in big trouble, but Hoon insists they continue, and they begin the surgery. Hoon asks for the drill, but when the nurse remembers that Baldy handled it, she tells Hoon to check it again. Hoon says they have no time and starts using it, but the blade comes off and cuts Hoon. Hoon needs to get it stitched, so he calls his first assistant to help, but the nurse tells him to get out of there for the sake of their son. They're now in need of a new surgeon, but when JD says everyone's already in surgery, Hoon tells them to call Jae-jun's team and ask for a surgeon. Jae-jun says the resident can go help him, but Soo-hyun tells him he can't perform the surgery. Jae-jun refuses to listen, so Soo-hyun goes over to Hoon's team to help. She switches sides with Hoon, and he says he'll do the surgery left-handed. Though both teams are tense, they both finish their surgeries successfully. While they celebrate, Soo-hyun hugs Hoon tightly, while JD watches, and when Hoon notices, he pulls away and leaves, making both girls sad. Hoon goes to meet with the man's family and tells her he'll need to stay under anesthesia for 4 days, so they thank him for his help. Meanwhile, the director and his weasel son plan to sabotage Hoon's team, so the son goes to the patient's wife and tells her that Hoon used a strange surgery without consent, which is why her husband isn't waking up. She then goes to confront Hoon and demands to have her husband woken up if there's truly nothing wrong with him. However, Hoon tells Jae-hee not to wake him up, as that may risk his recovery process. Meanwhile, Jae-jun confronts Soo-hyun and warns her that Hoon doesn't love her back since he's still obsessed with his missing girlfriend. Soo-hyun says that she knows already, but she can't stop herself from loving him. She apologizes for hurting him, but she says it's time for him to let her go. Afterward, Jae-jun goes to wake his patient up, but while his family is rejoicing, Hoon tries to tell his patient's wife to wait longer. She accuses him of trying to cover up something and tells him to wake him up, but Hoon refuses. Later, he goes before the disciplinary committee, who query him for using a risky surgery without consent. Hoon does his best to defend himself, but Jae-jun insists that if he's truly confident, he should wake the patient up. The meeting disbands and Hoon goes to confront Jae-jun privately, saying that he's trying to set him up. Jae-jun denies it when they suddenly hear an alert. Hoon rushes to find Soo-hyun resuscitating his patient, but when he asks what happened, she says he went into cardiac arrest when they tried to wake him up. Hoon pulls her outside and scolds her fall, almost ending his life, asking why she's meddling in the first place. That's when she confesses that she likes him and she can't do anything to help it. In response, Hoon tells her that her father conspired with Seok-ju to send his father to North Korea, so they could never be together. Soo-hyun rushes home and asks her father if it's true, so he admits it and says it was to save the hospital. The next day, Jae-hee tells Hoon they should try waking the patient because his vitals have been stable since the operation. Hoon reluctantly agrees, so they all gather around to wake him up, but the man doesn't seem to be responding. Suddenly, Jae-hee calls out to him loudly and he finally responds, proving Hoon's surgery was also a success. Afterward, Jae-joon learns that Soo-hyun called in sick, so he goes to check on her, and she tells him that Hoon rejected her when she confessed. He's tempted to leave her to drown in her tears, but he holds her and comforts her as she ugly cries. Later that day, Soo-hyun tells Jae-hee what happened, so she hugs her and apologizes for it. After, she goes to meet Hoon and says she feels bad, but Hoon says he tried his best not to hurt her. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun decides she needs to talk to Hoon, so she goes to his place, but when she doesn't find him, she goes through his laptop and sees his pictures with Jae-hee. When it couldn't get any worse, she turned back and saw them in person holding hands. Soo-hyun tries to leave, so Hoon follows her outside to apologize. He says he can't explain yet, so she asks him when he found she was Jae-hee. When he says it was the date he hugged her, she calls him a jerk and storms off. Later that day, Jae-hee gets home and tries to talk to Soo-hyun too, but Soo-hyun says she's covering the night shift and has to leave. While she's there, one of the patients starts making trouble, and when she tells him to behave, he slaps her. She returns the favor, which angers him, but before he can retaliate, Hoon shows up and stops him. They start to struggle when the gang boss shows up and recognizes Hoon, so they all kiss and make up. Soo-hyun takes Hoon to put some ice on his hand, and they finally get to talk. Soo-hyun tells him how hurt she is and cries in his arms, while Hoon comforts him. At that moment, Jae-hee calls to ask if he's seen Soo-hyun, but he lies and says he hasn't, while Jae-hee watches him with her. She returns home to cry about it and almost deletes their pictures when she thinks of another plan. She goes to meet with Suk-ju and reveals that she already told Hoon the plan. She then makes a new deal to ensure Hoon's safety. Jae-joon would be the one to work on the president and use her as his anesthetist, so she'll handle the mission personally. Because of this, Suk-ju calls Jae-joon and requests his presence, revealing that he knows who he really is. When they meet, Suk-ju says Hoon will be going away for a while, so Jae-joon would do the operation with Jae-hee's help. He also hands him an envelope full of things he can use to get his revenge on the director if he cooperates. Meanwhile, Jin-soo finds Hoon and tells him to come with him. They get to a lakeside where Jin-soo reveals that Jae-hee has left him out of the plan, which means he's no longer needed alive. However, before he can shoot, someone shoots him from behind, and it turns out to be Agent Glasses. When Hoon wonders who he is, he hands him the lollipop, which jogs Hoon's memory. Then he tells him of the deal Jae-hee cut to keep him and his mother safe. When Hoon struggles to believe, Agent Glasses reveals that he's the one who shot the North Korean agents on the bridge, and he's been looking after his mother too. However, he gives Hoon the choice of whether to cooperate or put his mother in danger. Meanwhile, the director tries to tell Soo-hyun to go to a branch hospital, but Jae-joon tells him, "I'll take responsibility for her." When they head outside, he tells her that whatever happens next, he hopes he'll forgive her and remember that he really loved her. Just then, he gets a call and goes to see a new patient they'd brought in with a septal rupture. Jae-joon immediately goes to meet the director and proposes they use this as the final, since there's another patient with the exact same condition. When the director warns him that Hoon has done the procedure before, Jae-joon says that the Prime Minister assured him that Hoon won't be around for a while. With this, the director tells Hyung-wook the news and lifts the ban on him operating too. Hyung-wook is overjoyed and tells his assistant to call Hoon, but no one can seem to find him. He and Soo-hyun even go to his house to look for him, but he's nowhere to be found, so Soo-hyun tells him he has to perform the surgery and save the patient's life. Meanwhile, Jae-joon is getting ready for his surgery with Jae-hee on his team. He asks her how she's so close with the Prime Minister, so she denies it and says they should talk later. After, Soo-hyun goes to talk to Jae-hee and asks why she would join Jae-joon's team, but Jae-hee tells her she's doing it for his sake and tells her not to worry. Afterward, the surgeries start and Hyung-wook makes his incision nervously. Everything is going okay until they cut a blood vessel and blood starts gushing out. As the director watches Hyung-wook crash and burn, he tells his son to prepare to tell Jae-joon to go to the other operating room and save the patient once he's done. At the same time, Hyung-wook cracks under the pressure and calls for Jae-joon to come, but when the doors open, it's actually Hoon who walks in. Hoon takes over and stabilizes the patient, so the director calls the first assistant and tells him to mess up the operation. The man is put in a tight spot with his wife watching him like a hawk, but he tries to stop Hoon from doing his job. Hoon catches on and sends him out of the room, then they successfully finish the operation. After, Hoon talks with Jae-hee and tells her they'll both work on the president together, and she'll never be alone again, but she needs to tell him where his mother is. However, Jae-hee isn't happy about this development and secretly calls Seok-ju's agent to say Hoon is still not part of the plan. Meanwhile, Hoon goes to Cheongnyi and finally gets to meet his mom. Even though she doesn't recognize him, he apologizes for believing she abandoned him all these years. At the same time, the director meets with Seok-ju, who tells him that they'll actually be working on the president and Jae-jun needs to win. Because of this, the director calls for Jae-jun and Hyun-wook to discuss the patients for the next match. However, when Hyun-wook notices Jae-jun's surgery will be much easier, he tries to object, but the director refuses to listen to him. Hyun-wook goes to tell Hoon about the development, but Hoon says he'll still do it since the matches have never been fair. Afterward, Hoon goes to ask Jae-jun to give up on the match, so he doesn't have to get his hands dirty, but Jae-jun asks if that's what his father did too. Hoon asks how Jae-jun knew his father worked on North Korea's leader, so Jae-jun lies that he heard from a friend in Harvard, who was the son of the man who died in the malpractice lawsuit. Hoon tries to explain what really happened to his dad, but Jae-jun refuses to listen, thinking they are all lies. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun finally talks to Jae-hee, who tells her that Hoon loves her because he transplanted her father's kidney into him and he feels guilty. She claims that Hoon likes Soo-hyun without any guilt and urges her to stay with him and see how he truly feels. Meanwhile, Jae-jun visits his patient for the competition, who happens to be the sister of one of his residents. After Jae-jun tells her that her operation is necessary, she feels sad because she doesn't want to get one. Hoon also meets with his patient and explains the operation to him. The girl patient overhears and asks Hoon if he would explain hers too. When they go back to his office, she tells him that she's supposed to get married soon and have kids, but getting the operation would reduce her chances of doing so. The patient asks to see her scan so she can vent her anger at it, but when Hoon pulls it up, he notices something strange. He immediately goes to confront Jae-jun and tells him that the patient doesn't have to get surgery yet, but Jae-jun insists they can't delay the competition and shouldn't gamble with her life. Her brother overhears them arguing, and when they're done, he goes to ask Jae-jun if what Hoon said is true, but Jae-jun insists that she needs the surgery, insisting that there's still a chance she might get pregnant after surgery. The female patient finds out and tries to call off the operation, but her brother insists that she has to get one. She reluctantly agrees and later hands him her phone, saying she's called off the wedding. Then they roll the two patients in for the surgery. As both teams prepare, Jae-hee switches to Jae-jun's team, and when Hoon asks why she did it, she tells him to remember what he did to her. Both teams finally get ready to operate, but as the patient's brother looks through her phone, he starts rethinking the surgery and runs into Hoon's room, begging him to switch patients with Jae-jun. Hoon hesitates at first, but he eventually agrees and stops Jae-jun from going any further by giving up on the competition. Later, the girl is rolled out of surgery and Hyun-wook blames Hoon for ruining his chances once again. After, Jae-hee goes to meet Hoon and tells him she knew he would do that. She then confronts him about letting her father die to save her life, and though Hoon tries to explain, she tells him she would never forgive him for it. Meanwhile, Seok-ju meets with the president and tells him Jae-jun will be operating on him, so they schedule the operation for next week, making Seok-ju glad that it's going according to plan. At the same time, the director meets with Jae-jun and makes him the acting chairman of the hospital. When Jae-jun asks what will happen to Hoon, the director says they'll find a way to cancel his license. Jae-jun asks why he hates Hoon so much, so he reveals that Hoon's father dared to challenge him, so he plotted with Seok-ju to get rid of him. Later, at the hospital's board meeting, Jae-jun spaces out as he realizes Hoon was telling the truth, but he spaces back in long enough to officially be named the acting chairman. Later that night, Jae-jun has dinner with the director and Soo-hyun, where they plan to hold a celebration for Jae-jun's promotion and announce his engagement to Soo-hyun. This surprises Soo-hyun, so when her father leaves, Jae-jun assures her he'll take care of it. He then tells her that he misjudged Hoon and thinks that he's worthy to be loved by her. Soo-hyun finds herself wondering what is going on and heads to Jae-jun's office, where she finds his castle. The resident comes in and tells her of Jae-jun's story of a knight trying to capture the castle through the princess, making Soo-hyun think he might be planning something. She then goes to Hoon with it, and Hoon remembers his conversation with Jae-jun and asks Soo-hyun if she knows someone called Song-hoo. When she says she doesn't, Hoon explains who he is, but Soo-hyo refuses to believe what she's thinking. Later at the celebration, Soo-hyun watches Jae-hee suspiciously as he goes to give his opening speech. After, someone delivers a message, and he goes to meet Hoon to apologize. Hoon tells him he shouldn't do anything he'll regret for Soo-hyun's sake, but Jae-jumin says it's already too late. At that moment, police officers arrive and arrest Soo-hyun's half-wit brother for embezzlement of funds. After he's taken away, the director asks Hyung-wook who ratted his son out, and when Hyung-wook says it was someone named Song-hoo, he instantly recognizes the name. At the same time, Soo-hyun confronts Jae-jumin and asks if he's Song-hoo. When he doesn't deny it, she begs him to stop what he's doing, but he insists that all he wants is a sincere apology. Because of this, Soo-hyun goes to tell her dad to apologize to Song-hoo, but he insists that he did nothing wrong and refuses to apologize. Meanwhile, Jae-hee meets with Suk-ju to finalize the plans and guarantee Hoon's safety. One of Suk-ju's agents goes to Hoon and shows him tickets to take him and his mother to Switzerland, but Hoon demands to see Jae-hee first. When he does, she tells him that he should take his mother and leave, insisting that she never wants to be with him again. Hoon sadly leaves, and he and his mother are on the way to the airport when the driver takes the wrong way and takes them to a lonely area to shoot them. Meanwhile, the president has a rethink and tells Suk-ju he wants Hoon to treat him because he cares more about his patients than winning. Because of this, Suk-ju tells his agent to let Hoon go and put him on the phone. While Hoon cusses Suk-ju out for betraying him, the agent kidnaps his mother, and Suk-ju warns him to do as he's told or she'll die. Back at the hospital, Jae-jun goes to see the director and tells him he met Song-hoo and all he wants is an apology. The director refuses, so Jae-ju starts revealing all the things he's done to ruin the hospital and tops it off by revealing that he's Song-hoo. The director has a heart attack at this reveal, and Jae-jun cries as he watches him collapse. Moments later, Soo-hyun busts into the room, and when she sees her father on the floor, she tells Jae-jun she'll never forgive him, and they rush her father out. He gets taken to surgery where Hoon operates on him with Soo-hyun's help. Later, she demands that Jae-jun leave the hospital while she goes to her father's side and cries by his bed. Before Jae-jun leaves, he goes to see Hoon and explains that he waited 20 years for his chance, but he still failed. Hoon calls bullshit and says that he knows he gave the director CPR, which is the only way he could have survived. Jae-jun says he's leaving and tells Hoon to take care of Soo-hyun, since she truly loves him, but Hoon tells him he found Jae-hee and can only do it as a friend. Meanwhile, the director wakes up and asks Soo-hyun for Jae-jun. When she reminds him that he left him for dead, the director reveals that it was Jae-jun who saved his life and tells her to get him back quickly. Soo-hyun ran out to look for him, but she was too late. He had already driven off. At the same time, Suk-ju's agent gets word that Jin-soo's body was never found, putting them on high alert while Jin-soo goes to Hoon's apartment, plotting his revenge. Later, Hoon meets with Soo-hyun, who tells her what Jae-hee had said to her, suggesting that she's only trying to push him away to protect him. With this, Hoon goes to confront Jae-hee and she tries to deny it. Hoon tells her to look him in the eyes and say she doesn't love him, but Jae-hee fails and finally confesses the truth. After they make up, they discuss how they can possibly save their plan, so Hoon suggests asking Agent Sunglasses for help. He goes to him and asks him to help stop Suk-ju, but the agent tells him he's loyal to his master and only helped Hoon to pay back his debt. Meanwhile, the president tells Suk-ju he'll be coming to visit him in the hospital the next day. When Jae-hee and Hoon hear of it, Hoon says he has to find a way to meet with the president and ask for his help, and for this, they'll need Soo-hyun. On the day of the president's visit, Soo-hyun shows him around the hospital until they get to a private room where Hoon is waiting. Hoon tries to tell him the truth about the prime minister, but Suk-ju suddenly shows up and stops him. Before the president can leave, Hoon touches his chest and uses the force, which freaks the president out. Later, Suk-ju blames his agent for letting Hoon meet the president, questioning his loyalty, which pisses him off. Suk-ju suddenly gets a call from the president, who says he wants to switch hospitals now. After, Suk-ju goes to threaten Hoon for ruining the plan, but Hoon assures him the president will be back. It turns out that after the president consulted with another doctor, they told him that the only procedure that could save his life is SABER, the same operation Hoon did left-handed. The president returns to the hospital and meets with Hoon again, while Suk-ju's agent guards the door. They discuss the details of the surgery, and Hoon promises it will go smoothly. Not long after, the president collapses and is rushed in for surgery, so Suk-ju seizes power in the meantime as acting president. Later, he goes to see the president and Hoon assures him he's in a coma like he asked, so Sukju starts gloating about his victory and confesses his crimes when the president suddenly opens his eyes. Jae-hee and Hoon walk in confidently along with the other agents, and Sukju realizes he's been set up by their secret plan. However, the president does an Uno reverse when he tells Sukju that he'll let him off the hook if he promises to be a faithful dog to him from then on. Sukju says he wants Hoon and Jae-hee in exchange, and the president agrees while they object and wonder how he could betray them like this. Afterward, Jae-hee and Hoon are escorted outside with Sukju to be taken to a remote place. Sukju enters his car first and leaves, but it suddenly stops and Jin-soo reveals himself and shoots Sukju. After he disappears, the agents rush Sukju inside and Hoon tells them to prepare him for surgery. As they roll him in, Jae-hee tells Hoon not to let him survive so they can finally be free, but Hoon tells her what his father's dying words to him were and insists that a doctor has to save lives. Hoon takes him inside and gets ready to begin when Agent Sunglasses comes in and tells him that no one would blame him if Sukju happened to die. However, Hoon tells him that the police catch thieves and doctors fix patients, which is what he's going to do. Hoon and Jae-hee operate on him alone and manage to get the 3 bullets out and save his life. Once the operation is successful, Agent Sunglasses tells them there's a car waiting for them with enough money for them to disappear for a while. Meanwhile, Chang-yi tries to look for Hoon, but when she can't find him, she goes to Soo-hyun and tells her what she knows, so they both decide to look for them. At the same time, Hoon and Jae-hee are on their way to the car when Hoon gets shot and Jin-soo appears. He tries to shoot Hoon a second time, but Jae-hee steps in front and protects him. As the girls search for them, they suddenly see Hoon holding on to Jae-hee as she dangles off a bridge once more. Jin-soo counts down to shoot Hoon, but Hoon promises he'll never let go, so when the time is up, Jin-soo shoots, and they both fall into the water. When Jin-soo sees that they're finally gone for good, he shoots himself too. 1 year later, Sukju is convicted of his crimes, and the president says that he decided to practice clean politics since Hoon's words moved him. At the hospital, Soo-hyun became a capable surgeon, while Hamwook's dreams finally came true, and he became the chairman of the hospital. Afterwards, Soo-hyun and Chang-yi met up to leave a flower at the bridge where Jae-hee and Hoon died to remember them. When Soo-hyun returned to the hospital, she saw Jae-jun, who entered to speak with her father. Jae-jun asked him to forgive him, but he said he could never forgive Song-hoo. However, when he was leaving, the director came out and said he could only forgive the Jae-jun who loved his daughter. After Jae-jun and Soo-hyun stepped out, and she told him she was sorry for not understanding the things that he went through. So Jae-jun told her he had somewhere to take her. On the way, he told her about Hoon and Jae-hee's real stories, and they both felt stupid for the things they said to them. However, when they arrived, Soo-hyun saw Hoon and was happy he was alive, though she scolded him for not telling her all this time. Then they all sat down to catch up. Meanwhile, Agent Glasses was still taking care of Hoon's mother, who seemed to be doing better. Back at Hoon's place, Soo-hyun asked of Jae-hee, so Jae-jun said she went to China as a refugee. However, moments later, Jae-jun and Soo-hyun watched from above as Hoon waited for a car. The car brought Jae-hee, who had just been granted asylum in South Korea. As they watched them reunite, Jae-jun said he finally believed in destiny, and Soo-hyun held onto his hand in agreement. If you enjoyed this video, comment, "The Force is better than a medical degree." Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.